Turkey has carried out a military operation inside Syria. The aim was to evacuate troops and move a tomb. But was that the only motive? And could that be a change in Ankara's policies on the Syrian crisis? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougaida. Since war broke out across its southern border in Syria, Turkey has been concerned but reluctant to directly intervene in the affairs of its neighbor. But it has been consistent about one thing: its right to defend the 700-year-old tomb of Suleiman Shah, the grandfather of the founder of the Ottoman Empire. Well, late on Saturday night, it did just that, launching a military operation 30 kilometers inside Syria to dismantle the tomb and remove the remains of Suleiman Shah to a different site. Well, hundreds of Turkish soldiers and nearly 100 tanks and armored vehicles were involved in that operation. Ankara has, of course, long been worried that the tomb could come under attack from ISIL fighters who have threatened in the past to destroy it. When he announced the operation on Sunday morning, the Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said the Syrian government was not told about it.
The decision was taken in Ankara within the rule of law and a parliamentary motion, a state of law, and we have not sought permission or assistance from anyone for this mission.
Well, Syria has responded to the Turkish operation, describing it as an act of, quote, flagrant aggression. But this is the first time that Ankara has publicly intervened in Syria. It came under pressure to help Kurdish fighters resist ISIL in Kobani, but in the end, it failed to do so. Well, Turkey's top priority is getting rid of Bashar al-Assad, and it accused the U.S. of focusing too narrowly on fighting ISIL. So on Thursday, the two countries signed an agreement to train and equip Syrian rebels, a sign perhaps that Turkey and the U.S. have found common ground on Syria. Well, let's now bring in our guests to discuss this. In London, we have with us Ammar Waqaf. He's a Syrian political activist. Also joining us from London is Haldun Solmaz-Turk, former Brigadier General of the Turkish military and senior fellow with the International Security Department at Chatham House. And here in the studio is Kamran Bukhari. He's an advisor to Stratfor in Middle Eastern and South Asian affairs. Thanks very much for joining us, all of you gentlemen, on Inside Story. Kamran, so when Syria says that this is a blatant violation of Syrian sovereignty and warns of consequences, what consequences are we talking about here?
I don't think that there is much that Syria can do. It has to threaten. Obviously, it just can't say, oh, well, it happened and move on. If it is going to be taken seriously as a government that still holds some power in Syria, then we have to expect these kind of responses. But in reality, I don't think that they're going to do much. We did see them fire upon, Turkish aircraft in the past, downing at least one of them. We may see something similar, but beyond that, I don't think that the Syrians can do much physically.
So is this a violation of Syrian sovereignty?
In theory, yes. But then the question is, does Syria have, the Syrian state exercise its writ over its territory? And the Turks and other powers will say no. And therefore, the claim of sovereignty is invalid to begin with. There is that argument that they'll make. I'm not saying it's a valid one or an invalid one, but that is an argument.
At the end of the day, the Turks did go 30 kilometers deep into Syrian land.
Yes, but then there is the complication that this tomb is considered sovereign territory of Turkey, according to an old treaty. Now, the Syrians may or may not recognize that, have a different opinion about that, protest it. But, sovereignty is a tricky question to begin with here.
Let's find out Haldun's reaction on sovereignty. I think I have a feeling what you're going to say, Haldun, but let me ask you whether you think this is, in fact, as the Syrians say, a violation of their sovereignty.
Of course, one would not expect them to say something else. they have to say it's a violation. But as has already been pointed out, there has been an agreement signed in 1921 between Turkey and France, which gave the sovereignty of this tomb, this area, to Turkey. Actually, Turkey moved its armed forces or armed units from its homeland, from the mainland, to another Turkish sovereign area for the purpose of extracting its military personnel and the tomb and other remains, which is of high national importance. And then Turkey did not stay there. Turkey moved back and come back to its within its own borders. I don't think this is a violation. This was an act inevitable, unavoidable, and Turkey did it in a very neat way.
Why would Turkey do this now at this particular point?
I suspect, bearing in mind the recent developments in the region, there's an expected increase in the fight between ISIL and Kurdish groups in the area, in the immediate vicinity, and Turkish government obviously was too concerned with the security of its forces there, so they felt obliged to extract them now. Yes.
But the Turks have been under pressure, at least domestically, for many months to deal with this situation, and the family members of the soldiers that were stationed at that tomb were putting pressure on the government to get them out or do something about that situation. But they haven't done anything in months about it.
Again, this is just a speculation. We don't know the exact detailed background of this operation, but I would expect Turkish government to try other ways to secure not only the security but also the proper constant supply of these troops there. And again, presumably, the Turkish government came to the point of realizing that there was no way, there was no common ground with ISIL or perhaps also with Kurdish groups to further, continue securing this tomb. So they must have felt obliged.
Ammar, what's your point of view on all of this and why this military operation by the Turks took place at this particular time?
I'm not so sure about the timing, actually. I'm yet to make heads or tails out of it. But I don't think that the Syrian government wasn't informed. I understand that Turkey said we didn't seek the permission of the Syrian government, but I do believe that the Syrian government would have been informed. The situation is very tense on the border, and if the Syrian government saw some 100 military vehicles heading south, they might have suspected this was going, for example, into Aleppo, or this is a spearhead of a wider NATO operation, so they might have reacted differently. So I would say it makes sense, at least through a third party, for the Turkish government to inform the Syrian government.
The Turkish government have said that they involved at least the US-led coalition, that this operation was taking place.
Yeah, but then the US coalition is also informing via third parties the Syrian government of their operations, not directly, obviously. So there is something there. So about the legitimacy issue, I don't think it was legitimate, obviously, to cross country through the Syrian territory and head for the Turkish enclave. But at the end of the day, this is the least of the worrying issues we're hearing from Ankara. I think the most worrying one is that Turkey have declared already that they're deciding to designate another piece of land inside Syria and raise the Turkish flag on it. In order to move back the remains of this ancient gentleman into Syrian land without seeking any authority, or at least telling the Syrian government or authorities about it. So this is rather far more serious an issue than actually relieving the soldier duty on that site.
They have moved the tomb Haldun to an area that is much closer to the border with Turkey. What do you make of that?
From Turkish government's perspective, this whole operation was intended not only to secure the Turkish military personnel there, but also to relocate the tomb, whose existence was based on an international treaty, to somewhere else, closer to the Turkish-Syrian border, but still inside Syria, giving the impression that Turkey, by this operation, does not necessarily give up its right to a sovereign territory within Syrian territory.
Well, should they decide of doing so inside Damascus next time around? I wonder. I don't know. It's a bit shabby, this business, don't you think?
Kamran, what's your...
This is a far-fetched statement, I'm afraid.
Let me just bring in Kamran and get your point of view on this really crucial point that we're discussing.
Absolutely. I don't look. The Turks are serious about the tomb, so I'm not saying that the tomb is insignificant. So the affairs of the tomb matter to Ankara, but there's a bigger geopolitical environment in which this is taking place, and you asked about the timing. I think that finally Turkey is realizing that the U.S. is not going to take the lead on Syria, and that Turkey has to take some form of lead, especially because it has a large border. And while Turkey continues to sort out internally what exactly it is going to do with regards to its aim of regime change in Damascus and dealing with the Daesh threat, and of course managing the Kurdish threat, they need to show that they are actually going to put their money where their mouth is. This is a low-cost way of demonstrating that. You can go in and say, well, look, at this time we're dealing with the tomb, but really it is sending a message to everybody, especially those who support the Syrian regime, particularly Iran, that we can take action cross-border if need be. Ammar just talked about that buffer zone, and they've been talking about a buffer zone forever, but there's been no movement on it. And I guess the Turks are not ready just yet to create that buffer zone. In the meantime, you also don't want the other people to take you in a non-serious way. In this way, you demonstrate that when the time comes, you can expect us to do cross-border action.
So does this have the potential of dragging in other countries? Because according to what you're saying, the Turks are basically sending a message with this initial step that they've taken. But also the fact that the Ammar and Haldun also raised the point, Ammar specifically, that the tomb is now being moved to another area that is within Syrian territory. So is it going to get much bigger?
I think it is. I mean, keep in mind that others are already involved. The Iranian IRGC, along with its advisors and forces and allied militiamen, are fighting, including Hezbollah, inside Syria.
Do you expect some sort of response from the Iranians on what happened at the tomb?
I think this is a moment for the Iranians to pause and look at the picture and say, well, what just happened here? Because, yes, the Turks have been talking about operating on Syrian soil, but they've not done anything. And so the pattern that they were used to has been slightly disturbed. So they're calculating on their end, they're basically debating within themselves that what is Turkey really up to? And then there is, should we respond? And then if we respond, how do we respond? Because obviously the Iranians do not want the Turks to get a message that, action like this will go unchallenged, and therefore Ankara can get comfortable with these cross-border raids. That's not in Iranian interest. But at the same time, they don't want to confront Turkey head-on. So it's a bit of a tricky situation. What do you do? I think both sides, Turkey and Iran, are dealing with a lot of constraints.
Do you think that is the case, Haldun? I want you to answer one of the questions that Kamran just put forward, and that is, what are the Turks really up to?
Yes, this is a critical question. I mean, many other people have been asking for quite a long time in Syrian-Iraq context. But let me put the record straight first. This was a so-called surgical military operation aimed at very limited political and military security aims. And it's over now. It was well planned, conducted in an efficient way, and now the Turkish forces are back inside Turkey, except for this very, very small, limited patch of land just across the border. Apart from this, we need to look at the overall general picture. Unless Turkey and the Turkish government is secured of a wider plan vis-a-vis the intended and political state in the region, in the Middle East in general, I don't think Turkish government or Turkey would anyway get involved in either Syria or in Iraq or somewhere else. I mean, if anything, this operation clearly indicates to me or shows, displays that Turkish government is determined not to get involved in Syrian internal affairs.
Ammar?
I think to the contrary, they're very much deep into Syrian internal affairs, probably not directly yet, but I think had the international community, especially the US and NATO, given Turkey a green light, it would have been a matter of weeks before Turkey entered Syria starting March 2011. The issue is that Turkey, probably the Turkish government, is fearing that they may be left outside and to dry if they enter Syria without the consent of NATO. And I don't think the complexities of the region itself and the issue of Israel and the issue of Iran is going to allow anybody to mess up a very complex situation already. But I think, going back to the issue that, for example, Turkey, sought the permission of no one to enter that, they don't have to. All the areas that they went into are controlled by Turkish allies, and Turkey controls their supply routes, the routes of weaponry, ammunition, and personnel. So there is a lot of communication that is already taking place there. They don't need their permission. They could just tell them to step aside. Now, is the Turkish government happy with building a long-term relationship with the current Syrian government? Of course they're not. They want them to see. They want to see the back of them as soon as possible. But they are definitely interfering. In the past few days, there was an army initiative in nearby Aleppo, northern of Aleppo, and about 500 fighters came in directly from Turkey, as it is reported by the media, in order to help regain some of the land that was confiscated or liberated by the Syrian army. It's a very complex situation, but it's just that probably Turkey hasn't found the time to be right yet to intervene pretty much directly.
Haldun, I'll just let you respond to that briefly.
I don't think the situation has anything to do with NATO at all. It's clear that Turkish government has already informed the Syrian government, and I would expect Turkey already, having informed its NATO allies and again the members of the UN Security Council as well. But again, this was a very limited operation. I don't think this is an indication of any further operations on the part of the Turkey or the Turkish government.
Let's just take a look at something here. Now, what happened in Syria, in fact, is the latest example of a regional power violating, as some are saying, the territorial sovereignty of another country, something that's occurred with increasing frequency over the last few years. The U.S. and regional Arab partners have been carrying out airstrikes in Syria without the permission of the Syrian government, though Assad has indicated that Damascus is aware when these strikes are actually taking place. And then there's Israel, who's carried out a number of strikes inside Syria. The latest was in January, killing an Iranian general and a number of Hezbollah fighters. And then just last week, we saw Egypt bomb ISIL-affiliated targets. That took place in eastern Libya after a number of Egyptian cops were killed by the group. So, Kamran, this is is it a sign of the times that this is happening in increasing frequency?
Indeed, it is a sign of the times. When the notion of state sovereignty in the United Nations, we all agreed, the global community agreed on international law and, the sanctity of the territory of a sovereign state. We did not have the circumstances that exist today. States were far more powerful than they are today, even though many of these states and those in that time period in the Middle East were new in their formation, carved out of the old Ottoman Empire. But today we live in a world where non-state actors are, running the affairs in many parts of established states. So territory, the writ of the state has weakened, ungoverned spaces have expanded, and therefore this notion of sovereignty has to be revised. One of the arguments that the Americans would make to the Pakistanis in the case of the drone strikes in the tribal areas of that country was that you can't claim, sovereignty over here because your writ does not extend into these areas, and if you're not going to do anything about it, or you can't do anything about it, then we can't just sit around. Those arguments are made by the Israelis, by the Egyptians in the recent case of Libya.
So this makes then the issue of accountability basically non-existent.
Well, there is no accountability to begin with. Remember, the international law is sort of in the purview of the United Nations, and the United Nations, the Security Council matters, and there are 5 permanent members who have veto power. The consensus or the lack thereof of those 5 powers is what determines what the international community would do. Will there be accountability? Will they condemn a certain violation of sovereignty or a claimed violation of sovereignty? Is it actually a violation of sovereignty? At the end of the day, international law is geopolitics, and geopolitics is a give and take or the lack thereof.
Ammar, is this sort of a pretext? Will we be seeing more of this territorial sovereignty or lack thereof?
I don't think so. I think the Syrian government does still have pretty much claim over its territorial sovereignty. I think the only reason why we don't see a confrontation between
it has lost large parts of the country, though, making it that very difficult.
Still, the Syrian government, my understanding is that they view this as a temporary sort of situation, but they haven't given up on that land at all. Far from it. The only reason where we don't see confrontation with the US-led coalition, I think, is that the Syrian government is benefiting actually from curbing and containing ISIS forces, strategically bumping them by the US. It is an undeclared ally. Turkey, I think this specific operation isn't much of an issue in its own right. The issue is going back to what your kind guest in the studio said. Do we revise the issue of sovereignty? It doesn't have to. It doesn't happen one way. I think the issue is that there are certain countries that deliberately try to destabilize other countries because they want to make, benefit of the geopolitical situation or chaos that is happening there in order to find reasons to intervene.
And who would that be?
Not really. Take example Syria, for example. If you think of Saudi Arabia, if you think of Turkey, if you think even of the United States, they didn't have much say inside Syria before the crisis of 2011. They armed, they helped groups of extremists. They sometimes call them moderates, but actually they're far from it. They share the same ideology with Al-Qaeda. They're being absorbed by Al-Qaeda, not being defeated by Al-Qaeda, which tells you a lot. And
right.
At the end of the day, in order to have a say on the inside, so there is a vacuum now in certain places, and that allows the likes of Turkey, US, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to intervene. The same thing happened in Libya. Any states...
Let Khaldoon respond to that Turkey is intervening. Khaldoon.
First of all, the idea that international law can be downgraded to geopolitics, I disagree with. With due respect, we have to keep in mind that some leaders in the West, particularly in the United States, has been increasingly repeating the idea, the suggestion that United Nations Security Council for an international intervention is desirable but not necessarily necessary. This is very, very, very risky. Regarding Syria and the recent Turkish operation, I respect the Syrian sovereignty as well as does the Turkish government by informing Syrian consulate in Ankara. But we need to keep in mind that the Syrian government does not have effective control in the region, in the area.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, but thank you very much for your thoughts. Ammar Waqaf from London, Haldun Solmaz Turk, and here with me here in the studio, Kamran Bukhari. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. If you have anything that you would like to add or say, you can go to our programs page at aljazeera.com. There you can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also send your tweets to @AJ Inside Story. I'm Darina Bougaida from the whole team. Goodbye for now.